Ms. Moreira, thank you very much for being here with us. Now, there are a number of questions that have been formulated specifically for the purpose of education and sharing information. And without further ado, if you don't mind, I'd like to pose the first question to you so that we can get off the ground. For those who are not aware of the work of UNCTAD on competition law and policy, can you explain why competition law is an important component of the work of UNCTAD?
With pleasure. So UNCTAD is now 59 years old. Next year it will celebrate its 60th anniversary. And it is the UN Conference for Trade and Development, having a very broad mandate that encompasses all economic issues related to development, including finance, international trade, obviously, technology, logistics, and also competition and consumer policies, which are the areas under my portfolio. What is interesting is that almost 43 years ago, so in December 1980, the United Nations General Assembly approved by consensus a set of recommendations. We call it the United Nations Set of Principles and Rules of Competition, which interestingly recognize the contribution of competition law and policy to what we call today inclusive economic growth and sustainable development, meaning that 43 years ago, a give and take, there was consensus on the contribution of competition law and policy for countries' development. That is to say that within the process of trade liberalization already ongoing and quite advanced, we just increased with globalization and more recently with digitalization, countries agreed that it was important that all the barriers to international trade and investment of public nature would not be replaced by private agreements between companies, concerted practices between big players, and abuse of market power by dominant businesses. So UNCTAD has this very important mandate and also provides the largest platform in all areas under its mandate, because we have 195 countries and we have a focus on assisting developing countries to better integrate the world economy. So we are the guardians of the UN set on competition, which have allowed us to promote the understanding of the importance of this public policy, to support developing countries in preparing, approving, and implementing competition law and policy, in setting up the necessary institutions to disseminate this regulatory framework, and also to do what we call competition advocacy, that is to say, to explain to all relevant stakeholders, starting with governmental bodies, but also private sector, civil society organizations, what are the benefits of competition and how this can really contribute to achieve all the growth and development goals that are usually included in countries' economic strategies.
Yes. Well, I see that UNCTAD has been around a long time, founded in 1964, and it specifically is to promote the interests of developing countries and world trade. Now, that, of course, will be of particular interest in the CARICOM context. So can you explain how competition policy plays a direct and indirect role in a country's industrial policy?
Of course. I would like to say that just as a start, that in any case, there has been increasingly consensus on the role and contribution of competition law and policy for development, because we moved from a picture where something like 25 countries in the 90s have adopted competition law and policy and set up competition authorities, to a scenario where we have give and take 140 countries, so several developing countries and even least developed countries having adopted and implementing competition law and policy. So there is consensus in this area, which of course is the outcome of the work of UNCTAD and other international and regional organizations, but we are very proud to announce this and confirm this. The interesting role of competition policy is that, first of all, competition law and policy is applicable to all sectors of economic activity in a country. And although it aims at private enterprises' conduct, it also is usually applicable to state-owned companies or public bodies that are active in the market and that are competing with private companies. So of course, there is here immediately an intersection between competition policy and industrial policy. And some may think that the introduction of competition policy is going to interfere and even possibly undermine overall economic policy priorities of the government. Now, what we have been observing is that increasingly there is this trend of competition authorities working together with other public bodies, advising governments on a number of key issues. And let me just refer these global challenges that all countries around the world are facing. So I already mentioned digitalization. So the use of market power of big tech, at the same time, sometimes lack of opportunities for micro and small and medium-sized companies to really export through digital platforms because they don't get fair conditions and they are subject to some sort of discriminatory treatment. But apart from digitalization, sustainability, which is now more essential than ever due to the environmental degradation and climate change negative impact across the world, but also other issues that were highlighted since the pandemic outbreak. That is to say, since the spring or the beginning of the spring of 2020. So because of the pandemic outbreak and for very good reasons, governments had to intervene in all economic activities, trying to restore the provision of consumer essential goods and services, trying to make sure that they kept jobs when possible and businesses afloat also when possible. And we observed a proliferation of economic recovery packages, of course, very well intended, in a very, very difficult situation that was common to all countries across the globe. But this also raised some concerns that because of the need to harness such a drastic public health situation, there would not be any room left for dynamic markets to be again functioning. So we have been advising then, and we saw with great pleasure that competition authorities were at the forefront of the public response to the negative impact of the pandemic, working with governments, collaborating with sector-specific regulators, so trying to contribute to a pro-competitive design and implementation of state aid type measures such as subsidies, tax exemptions, guarantees, sometimes given just to specific companies that had strategic positions in the markets or to whole sectors of the economy. And we think that for the past 3 years, this really illustrated the opportunity of collaboration between competition authorities and ministries of industry or ministries of economy and public bodies that have the responsibility of implementing various areas of industrial policy, underlining, therefore, that there is work to be done together, that collaboration and cooperation is essential, despite each of these bodies having their specific mandates and naturally being more concerned with implementing their own mandates. In any case, I also want to underline that the digitalization, the sustainability challenges have really shown that an holistic approach is the way forward. That is to say, combining different policy views through the contributions of different public bodies, also engaging relevant stakeholders in a participatory process that, of course, requires business representatives to have a say, consumer organizations and other non-governmental organizations to provide input, hearing from academia, hearing from civil society as a whole, from the public opinion, so that the public policy actions, regulatory frameworks, and specific solutions are comprehensive and really reflect, I would say, a thorough knowledge of what the issues are about and of the range of solutions that are possible. My point is that this opposition that maybe 20 years ago was considered that could exist between competition and industrial policies has been clearly overcome, maybe because of the challenges that globally all countries have had to face. And I want to mention that this summer in Geneva, we had a very interesting roundtable discussion exactly on this issue. And we learned from either developed and developing countries on very successful combinations of expertise, of knowledge, exchanges of views to build more sound solutions.
Can you tell us what work UNCTAD has done in recent years to support the establishment of regional competition authorities? And why are these institutions important?
Well, UNCTAD, because it focuses on international trade and development, as for decades since it started working, been very much addressing regional economic integration, because of course international trade is usually how countries, the reason why countries get together in order to promote through international trade their economic growth and development. And I think, of course, for most of us, especially in the competition field, the example of the European single market and the fact that competition law and policy was very early at the start identified as a key element to make sure that the market, that European single market would function as a single market without any public type of barriers, but also without any private originated barriers, so the anti-competitive practices. So this has really been, I think, at the center of the work of UNCTAD, first of all, from an international trade, typically, point of view, but again, with a big concern about the development implications. So interestingly, there has been a multiplication, as you know, of free trade and preferential trade agreements, several of them initially mostly either between developed countries, then gradually between developed and developing countries. But then already some decades ago, we started observing the development of regional economic organizations whose members are exclusively developing countries, but who also wanted to get together, reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers, promote investment, developed in common a number of key policies that could touch upon agriculture, industrial sectors, and several other issues, policies of other nature, let's say not necessarily just economic. And interestingly, competition law and policy has been elected as a key element at regional level by a number of organizations. So this is also a trend that we have been observing. For instance, in the African continent, there are currently 7 regional economic organizations that have regional competition law and policy, which is so interesting. So the first one to really get, I would say, the initiative and to really expand was the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, which celebrated this year 10 years of its COMESA Competition Commission, and that has expanded to consumer protection. So we supported not just the member states, but the establishment of this commission. Then we have worked on the other side of Africa, so to speak, with the Western Africa Economic and Monetary Union, which encompasses Central and Western African countries. We have worked with other organizations within the African continent, such as ECOWAS, such as SADC. As you can imagine, well, the continent is very vast, as I believe 54 or 55 countries, but some of these organizations have overlapping member states, but not necessarily the same scope. But again, here, Commissioner, there is consensus about the importance of competition law and policy, which is so interesting. And the latest important project in the African continent is, of course, the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, which is a very ambitious and a continental scope, and which also includes a competition protocol, which UNCTAD supported during the negotiations and in the drafting. And we are currently assisting the Secretariat of the AFCFTA in order to strengthen the capacities of their officials and also of the member states experts that are less knowledgeable. But I can tell you that we have also worked, of course, in Latin America. Let me just mention the Central American Competition Commission and the RICAC network. Of course, we have worked with CARICOM. We are now working with TIECA, also in Central America. We have worked with the Eurasian Economic Commission. We did recently a legal assessment of their competition rules and regulations. We have done voluntary peer reviews. We have launched 3 years ago, actually, a regular gathering of all regional economic organizations in the field of competition, which has provided a very interesting exchange of views and in some cases some protocols of collaboration between these organizations. So I think we have been at the forefront of supporting regional competition commissions, especially of developing countries, of course, trying to disseminate the international best practices, as it is our job, but also trying to provide them with tailor-made technical assistance and capacity building activities, because there is this proliferation of organizations, but they all have their own very specific framework and mandate. And this has been a very rewarding exercise for us, because frankly, with these global challenges that I already mentioned, we have been advising that for small and young competition authorities, for those who are less experienced and are less resourced or more resource constrained, regional cooperation is really the way forward, because this allows countries to pool resources, to launch joint market studies, joint investigations, to promote exchange of staff, to get leverage vis-a-vis big market players. We can talk about digital platforms, but in the past, all these big companies, in the pharmaceutical sector, or the big industrial producers were already, as multinational companies, of course, global players. And it can be very difficult for a young or a small competition authority of a developing country to actually be able to engage in a balanced dialogue with these big multinational companies. So, of course, if there is a competence for regional competition law and policy, the regional organization or the regional commission is extremely, and I would suggest, better placed to have this dialogue and let's say and agree even to solution, to enforce law and to impose commitments or remedies, and to negotiate when there is merger control competences, also to negotiate settlements or commitments, as I mentioned, that serve the whole region in a more balanced, in a more even, and I would suggest fairer way. So we really think that for developing countries, regional cooperation, namely through regional competition commissions, is really the way to explore. And we are convinced that regional cooperation provides a major contribution to international cooperation. And of course, being within the United Nations, we can only be always advising towards increased and fruitful international cooperation.
Yes, it only makes sense that the trend that had started among developed countries for economic cooperation through various agreements had to be followed and expanded to include developing countries. And we, as you say, we have seen a trend of developing countries forming their own regional groups, which is so important so that you can pool your resources, and with larger resources, hopefully have more leverage in terms of negotiating ability. So we have seen that happen. And of course, CARICOM has been part of that process. So given that that has begun, what advice would you give to the CARICOM single market and economy concerning establishment of competition frameworks in member states?
Thank you. Well, as I said, I think nowadays any country recognizes that the market economy can be, let's say, a vehicle for the achievement of their economic, social prosperity, and of course for that development. So competition law and policy has become a basic instrument in the public policies toolkit, if I may say so. So I think it is very important that competition law and policy is fully understood. Sometimes we have observed, of course, in our work across the world, but focus on developing countries, as I mentioned, that, of course, countries are eager to adopt competition law and to set up an institution to enforce that law, but then sometimes they are challenged by the lack of resources, by the lack of expertise, by the lack of understanding in the market and in society how competition is beneficial to their consumers, to their citizens, to their businesses. So I think it is very important that competition law and policy is really adopted but explained to all relevant stakeholders in a country, because otherwise it may be difficult for a young and small competition authority to get the recognition, to get the public support. I would suggest that often it's just because citizens are not aware of how competition can provide them a wider range of goods and services with better quality, with lower prices. how competition law and policy ensures opportunities for micro and small and medium-sized companies, how competition can encourage foreign direct investment in a country, how competition can really foster innovation, and overall contributing, I would say, to the country's economic growth development, but also to, of course, to consumer welfare and to overall welfare. So I think this is very beneficial. Now, I think also that establishment of competition frameworks in member states needs to be adjusted to the specificities of the countries. So I know that, and I think it's very interesting that we have a very lively international competition community. So there are a lot of formal and informal exchanges. There is cooperation by international regional organizations and networks, and bilaterally and by academia. And frankly, from our point of view, because we provide the largest platform, the more the merrier, if you allow me the expression. But it is important that the option at national level is adjusted, as I was saying, to the particularities of a certain country. And here is, again, when I would like to mention the UN set on competition, because this ensemble of recommendations that was approved almost 43 years ago encompasses what we call a development dimension. That is to say, it recognizes the legitimacy of member states to adopt and implement competition law and policy according to their specificities. That is to say that, frankly, if a country is undergoing a process of liberalization and needs to temporarily, exceptionally exempt very strategic sectors from the full submission to competition law and policy, this could be justified. Of course, this is supposed to be an exception, a temporarily a restriction, but it is understandable that member states need to adjust a regulatory framework to their political priorities. So this idea is that there is no one size fits all, despite the consensus around competition law and policy. The legal framework, the institutional setting, the engagement with other stakeholders is essential, but needs to be tailor-made to the specificities of the countries. And we think that those member states that are that are member states of a regional economic organization, such as CARICOM, are very well placed because, and they are very lucky in a way, if you allow me, because there will always be member states that are more experienced within that remit. They can reach out also to the CARICOM Competition Commission, and of course to all other partners. But I think it is a privilege to be a part of a regional economic organization where there is experience, such as in the CARICOM, on competition law and policy at regional level, because this can really be support and come in assistance of the member states that are less developed in this field.
Well, Ms. Teresa Moreira, thank you very much. That was not just informative, it was engaging. So I enjoyed learning what you had to say, and I am sure that our members in CARICOM and individual viewers, hopefully, will also take stock and see where we go from here. It was a pleasure meeting you and a pleasure chatting with you.